Yay! All right, I'm excited. So I have finally figured out to do this. So it's recording, and all right. So let that go here. All right, so let me, greetings everybody. All right, so here we are at the American politics class, or American political institutions formally. And so I don't forget, let's go to Cyber Campus. And good morning. Please have some chocolate. Okay. And so we go here, and so we go to Cyber Campus, go here, and so I go to the attendance, and why doesn't it English? Yeah, so we go here, and hopefully I said English, not Chinese, English. And see here, of course, it's always an exciting trend here. Okay, let me see if this works now. And why doesn't it go to Cyber Campus? And where is Cyber Campus? ECY? Yeah. But between the E and the CY, you need to put Can you come up here and do this? Can you show it, please? Okay. It should work. I mean, I don't.
It's not showing it because on my phone it shows me directly.
Let me just try to go enter one more time the way I normally do. And if it would show in English, that would be really cool. I just don't see why it's not. You click here and it just. Well, maybe. We have to have Cyber Campus, so I'm going to go back to this computer. We will not be defeated. Never will we be defeated. So let me go back to the computer and go to Cyber Campus and go to Introduction to American Political Institutions, attendance, and we're still technically in week 3, smart attendance, and so you're smart. Maybe it's not letting me go to log in, here, go to Cyber Campus, and go to attendance. Add, and why doesn't it smart attendance? And why is it not showing up? That's interesting. Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, I've just never seen this emerge like this before. So if we go, I mean, what the heck is it doing? So Hakyo soke ipak kyoyok. I don't know. Cyber Campus. It should be something pretty straightforward, but okay, well, there it goes. Okay, sorry. So log in. And it's space. Oh, sorry. My password is. Okay. Oh God. Okay. Smart. And we go to Migu. That's it. And we go to, and the number is smart. What does that mean? Okay, well, I tell you what, why don't you all just send me, what am I doing wrong here? Cyber Campus, that, log in. Oh, okay, log back in. Like this. That. Why? I mean, I don't know why I'm doing this again. I don't know why it makes a difference, but it should come up. And are we in week? We're in week 3. Smart, and then nothing comes up here for some reason. Oh, there it is. Okay, 598. Woo! 598. God knows what happened. 598. Okay, 598 is your smart attendance number. Woo! Okay. Don't ever give up. Don't give up. We will all come out of this pandemic even better than we are going in, because we are learning new things and overcoming challenges and checking, and then we grow and develop as individuals, students, professors. Yay! All right. So now what I need to do is I need to put in my flash drive and get my files out that I want to share with you today. And I've got to make sure that I finish class with enough time to download the recording and get out of here by 10 till 12, because there's another class coming in. So we go here, and go here, and I think you already saw that I posted the midterm for this class. And the midterm is, and where did I put the midterm? Midterm is under, yay, midterm exam. So the midterm is posted at Cyber Campus, and it says that critique the statement: the U.S. response to the global COVID-19 pandemic shows that the American political institutions are increasingly obsolete. It's a general, provocative statement that requires you to interpret what I'm saying. What does it mean? Increasingly obsolete. Does it mean compared to the other developed, so-called developed democracies like South Korea? I think we would call that a developed democracy. Taiwan, Belgium, Switzerland, France. Do we compare it with in Japan, or what about compared with the China, which until very recently was touting itself as a success story, that this country with 20% of the world's population had succeeded in stopping COVID. And of course, now the situation is very different in China because of Omicron and the Omicron BA.2 variant, and it's highly contagious. But still, the fact remains that 30% of the American population has not been vaccinated. So 70% has, but 30% of the American population has not. And maybe 10 or 12% of that 30%, 10 or 12% include children who have not yet been approved for the vaccine. I think in the United States, only individuals 5 and older have been approved for the vaccine. The question is, do you make it available to children younger than 5? But even so, vaccination rates in, you're from Belgium, kiddo? Where are you from? Yeah, but where are you studying? Where are you living? What, are you a student from Belgium? France, okay. And yeah, and so what's been the French vaccination rate? Do you know? Yeah, and you're from Switzerland, honey? And what's the vaccination rate in Switzerland? Only that, right? And you're from Belgium? Oh, Germany. What's your name? Oh, Micah Belinsky. Micah Belinsky, yes. What part of Germany? Uh-huh. Oh, yeah? Yeah, yeah, I've been to Cologne. Um, and what's the vaccination rate in Germany? Do you know? Uh-huh. The word is, or the claim is that the vaccination rate is much higher, significantly higher in Western Europe than it is in the United States. And certainly the casualty rate, we're now at 1 million dead in the United States from the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, that's the highest in the world, but of course, much else of the rest of the world does not have very good record keeping. Like, we really don't know how many people have died of COVID, let us say, in India. Or we don't even really know how many have died in Brazil. But in terms of recorded death rates, the United States has the highest casualty rate per person officially. Does it show, in terms of the difficulty the Americans have had in addressing and responding compared to Germany or France or Switzerland or South Korea or China, that the American political constitution is obsolete? Constitution broadly understood. And you remember you wrote a paragraph on the question of whether or not the South Korean Constitution is quote unquote better than the American Constitution, because the South Koreans had the benefit of learning from the earlier experience and efforts, failed and otherwise, of other countries. Does that mean that the South Korean Constitution is quote better? What does better mean? There's not a single answer to that, obviously. There's not a single answer to what it means to be increasingly obsolete. But I should tell you, and I'll show you later, I wasn't really, I think, going to show it to you today, that, well, I mean, this issue has been raised by observers in the United States for years, that the American Constitution is not well structured to deal with the challenges that the Americans face in the early 21st century. So if we go here and we go to, let me see, I want to share a screen. And we go here and we go to the lesson plan. Let me show you something that I think I've never really shown the class before, which is a quote from a book, another book. Yes, this from not that old, 2013, 9 years ago, that the American Constitution is, because of its system of divided powers, separation of powers, in which the presidency does not directly control the US Congress the way the British Prime Minister controls the US Congress, or the way, for example, the German Chancellor is basically supposed to be able to control the Bundestag, the federal German parliament. That's not the system in the United States. And so it's very difficult for US companies, US governments to enact far-reaching reforms, because it can only happen typically when one party controls the presidency and the US Senate and the US House of Representatives. And that typically rarely happens. The last time we had one president party controlling the presidency and also the Congress is now, for example, under Joe Biden. And Joe Biden has not been able to carry out the big plans that he had to, for example, adopt climate change, far-reaching climate change legislation that would begin to transform the American economy to eliminate net greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And Joe Biden was promising the European Union, the Europeans, that U.S. would take a bold position, a leading position effort in this global effort to deal with climate change. And even when Joe Biden's Democratic Party controls both the Senate and the House, he can't get this legislation approved. He's still struggling with it, but the claim is that in November of this year, there will be new congressional elections in 6 months from now, and the Democrats will lose one or both houses of Congress. And the Republicans will take control over the House and maybe the Senate, in which case Joe Biden will never get any more major legislation approved through the US Congress unless there's some type of national security disaster like emerging now over Ukraine to push the United States to adopt legislation to deal with the national security threat. But certainly in terms of reforming the economy to undertake what Germany is committed to and the European Union is committed to in terms of climate change, his Build Back Better legislation, BBB, Build Back Better legislation, is stalled. And this is when one party does control the Congress and the presidency. And wait, some people are describing the climate change. Yes. Yeah, but that's the, yeah, and that's that is a reflection of the U.S. Constitution, broadly understood, not just the document, the Constitution, but the separation of powers in the federal system. Thank you for emphasizing the federal system. Joe Manchin is elected from West Virginia. West Virginia is an economy that emerged around coal and gas, even though coal and gas production is fading in West Virginia. He is the most well-funded campaigner for office by the fossil fuel industry. He receives the most funding from interest groups representing oil and gas and coal companies in the United States and elsewhere to promote their interests. And he knows what he needs to do to keep his job. He knows what he needs to do to get reelected. And and again, you know, keeping his job and getting reelected, that's what all of these congressmen and women and including the presidents of the United States, that's what they're focused on, getting reelected. And he knows what he needs to do. And supporting his president, Joe Biden's Build Back Better plan, is not what he needs to do to keep his job. It will cause him to lose reelection. He's concerned, he thinks. And Joe Biden has not been able, and the executive branch of the United States under the Biden administration has not yet been able to convince him to give him other benefits, other payoffs, other economic opportunities for the state of West Virginia to compensate for appearing to attack the fossil fuel, the oil, gas, and coal industry. And because of the impact that will make on the elections. Joe Manchin, I'm sure, said repeatedly to Joe Biden, if I lose re-election, you know who's going to replace me, a Republican. It's definite. Donald Trump won West Virginia in the 2016 and 2020 elections by more than 40% over his competitor, Joe Biden, in 2020, and around 40%. Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton in 2016. And but that's the understanding what the U.S. Constitution is like. If you cannot deal with climate change effectively, can you really say that the American nation state is the leader of the democratic, developed countries of the world? That the United States provides global leadership? That the United States is able to meet these challenges aside from the pandemic and its comparatively poor performance in dealing with the pandemic? Or, of course, some people might disagree with that claim, right? But how about climate change? From what some people are describing, this challenge to the world is the greatest we faced, and the Americans claim to be the leader of the developed democratic world, and they're not able to meet this challenge, supposedly. So, yeah, the pandemic, of course, is something on everybody's minds, but since you as European students coming from the European countries where the European Union has declared and staked its position in terms of its role in the world dealing with climate change and environmental threats to well-being of our world community, that is a primary claim to influence and primary claim of the role of the European Union in Europe and the world today. And then, of course, we also have the paragraph due for our debate on Friday. And so in terms of what we want to cover today, let's thank you for your questions. Let's go on and talk a bit about, well, I mean, we can always talk more about the midterm. We don't have to talk about it all today, but just to highlight some of the points that we've made, that the first draft should not be more than 500 words. I will put a check plus, check, or check minus on the first draft, and I'll put my comments on the first draft and send it back to you. I'll put the comments in the track function in Microsoft Word and send them back to you so you can rewrite your essays. And then we will meet and we will talk during the midterm week about your draft and my comments for probably for an hour each. And you know, with Zoom, I've been meeting with students over the last few semesters on Zoom. I used to ask them each to come to my office and sit next to me in my office and look at their draft on the computer. But of course, we've been doing this on Zoom. And one of the nice aspects about Zoom is that we can record the meetings, video record the meetings, so you can go back and look at the meetings and see the meetings and my comments again to have things explained. And we can also use the computers like we're using it now to highlight my comments like this. And so we're dealing with the pandemic, you know, for example, well, I should tell you, like next week, I have to go away to a conference in US. The International Studies Association is this big academic conference. It's held every year. And next year it's held in Nashville, Tennessee, the capital of American country music. And I will teach on Zoom while I'm there. So I'm 13 hours behind you. So when we meet on Monday at 10 o'clock next Monday, it will be 9 o'clock in the evening my time on Sunday. But I might miss a class or two because I'm traveling. I'll be on flight. And then I have a doctor's appointment. I have to get some tests done during Wednesday next April, in April next month. And so to make up for those missed classes, if I miss any, we're going to meet longer on Zoom, and it just be me and you one-on-one talking about your midterm paper, first draft, and ideas. And I get a lot of ideas from these meetings because I have to try to explain my comments, and I go on and on and on. And because I have to, like when I'm teaching now, when I have to try to express what's in my head, it becomes more clear. And that's why we write. That's why I write. That's why you write. I write for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons why I write is because I learn that way. If I have to write down what is in my head and clarify and specify it, I learn and develop my ideas further. And that's one of the benefits of teaching. So so that's due Saturday, April 16, and then your final draft of your paper will be due Saturday, May 7th. And I'll just put a letter grade on that final draft. And okay, so that's the midterm. And of course, if you have questions, you know, I just keep coming back to these points that the writer should use and cite information from at least 3 different chapter headings from March 2nd through April 19th. That's, in other words, from at least 3 chapters in chapters 1 through 7 of the textbook. Like I asked you in each of your paragraphs to use and cite specific information from scholarly peer-reviewed sources, such as may be found in the reading, to support, develop, and refine your points. I want you to do that for in the midterms, but use and cite information from at least 3 different chapters. You can do more. You can find other sources of information, but you must use and cite information from at least 3 of chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay? To prove your claim or your interpretation or your response to this statement that the American political institutions are increasingly obsolete in our world today. And okay, so onward to this week's material, and you're reading about civil liberties. And civil liberties is the term that is used to describe the liberties or freedoms of Americans that are supposed to be guaranteed by the US Constitution. And typically those guarantees focus on limiting the power of the central government. So that's the theme in the book, right? That we talked about already. The United States is a country that was founded by Europeans wanting to make maximum profit with access to vast resources, and also to worship God in the way they wish to worship God, and being many, many, many kilometers, thousands of kilometers away from Europe, and having to rely upon themselves. And then, just again to briefly recap, into the middle of the 18th century, France and Britain are economically becoming more and more powerful. The French and British empires are expanding around the world. And in the middle of the 18th century, there's a war in Europe that is called the 7 Years' War. And this 7 Years' War basically was, in many ways, can be understood in many different ways, but one way it can be understood as a contest between France and Great Britain in terms of their competition for accessing and controlling the resources of North America. The 7 Years' War began in North America as the Americans and the British Empire came into conflict with the French Empire in expanding west. And the war is called the French and Indian War because the Americans and the British were allied against the French and their Indian allies in the war. And this war was the First World War. This war was fought on all continents except Africa, except Antarctica. The 7 Years' War was fought all over the world. And the costs of this war were great. And the British tried to, as we talked about earlier, they attempted to make the Americans pay more of the cost of the war and stationing permanently large, significant numbers of British soldiers in North America. And this infringed upon American attitudes that had developed over 150 years of being basically left alone to run their own affairs. Even when the British attempted to restrict American trade, say, with other countries besides Britain, it wasn't really enforced. So the American colonies were not supposed to be doing business with the French colonies, but they did business with the French and Spanish colonies in North and South America because the British really couldn't enforce much. But then in the middle of the 18th century, the British began to focus more on enforcement. And so I'm not going to go over this again, but just to highlight that in terms of American understanding of what it means to be free, including their religious backgrounds and their political experiences, their understanding of what it means to be free is basically tied up with this hostility to powerful central government. And to go back to the midterm question, in the modern economy of the 21st century, how can you have a modern economy dealing with global pandemics and global climate change unless there's national leadership? There has to be effective government to deal with our growing awareness of what has always been true, that we are all interdependent. And the way we deal with the pandemic in America or China or Africa will affect the well-being of Europeans and Americans and Chinese, anywhere else in the world. But the American Constitution was formed out of the American Revolutionary War, and then the failure to begin the process of building a new state after the American Revolutionary War led to the effort to create a real central government that could make decisions that large minorities of constituencies and stakeholders might not like. But there needed to be a central government that would make fundamental decisions regarding security and the economy, even if it's going to upset some losers in those various decisions that would be made over the years. And that was something which Americans were not used to dealing with. And as I said, it would not be finally resolved into the American Civil War, but the Constitution emphasizes limitations on the power of government. When, of course, to jump ahead to today, or at least to the 20th century, if people are going to be truly free and truly able to develop their capacities and pursue their dreams, you need to have positive government intervention. For example, to, as I said, regulate a national economy, or for example, to provide education and a higher education system for people, and provide the manpower and human resources for a modern economy. So this chapter on civil liberties, keep in mind, let me say something else about the textbook. The chapter on civil liberties and the whole textbook is oriented towards people, I think, who many of the students are planning to go to law school. That students are taking this course and they need to know the basics so that they can then apply after they finish their 4-year bachelor's degree, then to go to law school in the United States to become an attorney. And law is a little bit different in the American and British case than from continental Europe, in Germany, France, in Switzerland. You have to go get a graduate degree after your undergraduate degree in order to be involved in the legal service in the United States. It costs a lot of money, and the prestige of the school is very important. So students who get a law degree from Yale or Harvard, that means a lot, as opposed to going to law school for 3 years typically at another of the many law schools in the United States. And so if you're going to go to law school, you need to know this history of the development of American law, and this focus on civil liberties it strikes me as being oriented towards trying to begin to explain to students how the early American state became the modern American state. An American state that does actively intervene today, for example, in ways that most Americans accept, that when you get old, you're going to get a pension. And the central government, the federal government, the national government has an obligation and has the power and the obligation to guarantee all old people a basic minimum income so that they don't live in poverty when they can't work because they're sick and old. The American government also should play an important role in intervening in American society to prevent abuse of people because they belong to certain groups that most Americans, or a lot of Americans, hate or are prejudiced against. Like, for example, the intervention of the American government to stop systemic segregation and marginalization against African Americans, beginning particularly after World War II. So this is the discussion of the beginning of the modern American state. And so the first constitutional amendments in the US Constitution are the so-called Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the US Constitution that were adopted at the same time as the Constitution. So they're not really separate from the Constitution. They're not amendments that happen years or decades later. They were formulated and written down to try to persuade those people who could vote. We're only talking about rich men, rich white men could vote in late 1700s, to persuade them to vote to support the Constitution and address their suspicion or fear that this central government, this new powerful central government, will become a source of despotism and tyranny, the way the British Crown under the King in London had been perceived as a source of tyranny and despotism, infringing the rights of the American people. And so in 1787, when the Constitution is being negotiated and signed, most of the state constitutions of the 13 original states explicitly protected a variety of personal liberties. So the new Constitution is going to be taken heavily from the state constitutions. That was the experience, that was the knowledge, and that was familiar, right? And again, we're talking about rich white men could vote. Rich white men, for the most part, they would be literate, they would be educated, they would know what a state constitution was, and they were probably, for the most part, trained in law. And this new constitution would shift power to the national government, but upholding these liberties, protecting them from despotism of a powerful central government would be a critical concern. And the Anti-Federalist Party was expressing that concern. And the Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments to the US Constitution. At first, the Federalists said, we don't need to have an explicit statement of the rights of American people in the Constitution. The American Constitution should just be an outline of the process of making laws. We don't need to have a statement of what the fundamental rights of Americans are. And by the way, keep in mind, because I know you're from Europe, and that this Bill of Rights, because of American power, particularly following World War II, this would become, because America was so powerful at the end of World War II, would become very influential in the development of worldwide international human rights movement. So this notion of a Bill of Rights would be, because of American power and influence, would strongly influence the development of the new United Nations and its international human rights treaties, beginning with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. And so, again, reflecting this power of the United States at the end of World War II compared to the rest of the world, which was devastated by the war, while the Americans were largely untouched. But then, so there was an opposition from the Federalists to having some kind of statement of what the essential rights of the people would be. Keep in mind, this concern would be that if you state and write down what the rights of people are, the civil liberties of people are, then you might well leave something out. And since you left it out, intentionally or unintentionally, the federal government authorities could claim that that's not your civil liberties. It's not in your right because it wasn't written down originally. So there's a danger of writing these things down, because if you write them down, you might leave something out. And if you leave it out, it implies that it's not your right to have that protection. And then but to get this Constitution adopted, the Constitutional Convention did agree that there should be some statement about what the limitations of the power of the central government would be. That's what the civil liberties would be, a statement of the limitations of the power of the central government. And the first 10 amendments to the Constitution contain numerous specific guarantees: free speech, free press, freedom of religion, and then a statement that anything that is not stated explicitly in the Constitution belongs to the states. So if the Constitution does not give the US central government a power, then the US central government does not get the power. It's contained by the states. whatever that might be, because it couldn't be certain of what the world was going to be like 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years from the time they're writing the Constitution. And then the 10th Amendment reiterates that powers not delegated to the national government are reserved to the states or to the people. What does that mean, to the people? To the states or to the people? You could say to the people means laws passed by the federal government, the national central government. They represent the people versus the states. Keep in mind, this would not be finally resolved until a horribly bloody civil war was fought. The first war to really show the impact of the Industrial Revolution. I mean, I know you're Europeans, right? You've studied Napoleon and his great battles at Austerlitz and Jena, and those those battles lasted one day, typically 8 hours. But the American Civil War, you started seeing battles last days, even weeks. You started seeing the battlefield expand tremendously because of the, particularly the impact of railroads. And then in World War I, you Europeans would really find out what the Industrial Revolution meant for war. Like the Battle of Verdun in 1916, I think lasted 6 months. Yeah, and like 500,000 casualties on each side. Incredible, the most horrible things the world has ever seen, even to this day, in terms of battlefield. Although we've come close in Stalingrad, and God knows what's going to happen now in Kiev. So the Bill of Rights intended to limit the powers of the national government, and then there was some development of this principle by the courts. So again, this course is set up for many students. Not all, but again, this awareness that a lot of students are taking these classes because they want to go to law school. So there's going to be this focus on legal cases. Barron versus Baltimore, 1833. A court ruled that the National Bill of Rights limited only the actions of the U.S. government and not those of the states. That's an important statement. That the states are not limited by the Bill of Rights. The states can do bad things. The state governments of Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, Ohio, Texas, they can do unpleasant things because the Bill of Rights only limits the power of the national government. And this was supposedly declared in Barron versus Baltimore. But the decision suggested the possibility that some of or all of the protections might be interpreted to prevent state infringements of those rights. So even so, people are aware that. Well, let me get to the point. I mean, this tension with slavery and enslavement of other human beings, that was present even before the Revolutionary War. I mean, when the British were fighting the Revolutionary War, they tried to encourage American enslaved people to rise up, promising them if they won the war, that the British would abolish slavery in America. And that, of course, irritated the colonists greatly. So this focus on states' rights and state powers is often the rhetorical framework in which this subtext, or sometimes openly public debate, or sometimes implicit debate about slavery. Can the states have power? In other words, certain states are allowed to keep their institution of enslavement, enslaved labor. And this threat to the country from this dispute over slavery would emerge in the 1820s. There was a crisis in the 1820s involving Andrew Jackson when South Carolina, the state of South Carolina, declared that it had the right to nullify any laws from the federal government that it thought were unconstitutional. And Andrew Jackson had to threaten to send in the U.S. Army to deal with that South Carolina threat. And then South Carolina, 40 years later, would be the first state to secede from the United States, to start the Civil War. The 14th Amendment was adopted after the Civil War. This made the Bill of Rights applicable to the states, that the states also, this is after the Civil War, one of the three, it's called Civil War Amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment promised that everybody in America has the right to protection under the law, to due process. And the 14th Amendment, this has been one of the critical amendments to the US Constitution. It said that, implied that the Bill of Rights, or made the Bill of Rights applicable to the states, that the states may not violate the rights of Americans. It begins the process of turning civil liberties into civil rights that the US national government must guarantee. And over the years since then, this clause has been construed to guarantee to individuals a variety of rights, including economic liberty, criminal procedural rights, and protection from arbitrary governmental action. So, for example, this was used most recently after this slide was prepared, this slideshow was prepared, to guarantee, make LGBTQ marriage, gay marriage legal 7 years ago. In Obergefell versus Hodges, what was it, another Supreme Court case named Obergefell versus Hodges. And the US Supreme Court said, you can't prevent two people of the same gender from getting married because it violates the 14th Amendment. If you're going to target somebody specifically for restrictions, you have to have a really good argument as to why you must not allow two men or two women to get married if they want to get married, because it violates that kind of explicit discrimination against those people, doesn't correspond with the 14th Amendment's protections to everybody from arbitrary governmental action. And it promised it's supposed to promise a fair trial to people. And it was developed further through other, again, court cases, legal court cases. An interpretation, the incorporation doctrine, which you would need to know if you're going to go to law school, right, is an interpretation of the Constitution that holds that the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment requires that state and local governments also guarantee those rights. Reaffirmed in Gitlow versus New York, Neer versus Minnesota, two American states, and then there are some limitations on this. So a judicial doctrine in selective incorporation is a judicial doctrine whereby most but not all of the protections found in the Bill of Rights are made applicable to the states via the 14th Amendment. And then fundamental freedoms are those rights defined by the court to be essential to order, liberty, and justice. So you can see some of these important, these are, again, legal cases, all done through law, through the court system, not through legislation passed by the Congress for the most part, Supreme Court actions. And like until 1967, white and black people were not allowed to be married. 5 years after, until 5 years after I was born, in 1967 in Loving versus Virginia, that was the name of the couple, Loving, a black woman and a white man got married in Virginia. And Virginia said, the law says black and white people may not mix. It's called miscegenation laws. And were those laws abolished by the act of the president and the US Congress? No. It was done by 9 old men in the US Supreme Court ruling in 1967 that these laws are unconstitutional. Unconstitutional. They violate the Constitution. And again and again and again, the role of the Supreme Court has been critical. Not the Congress. Obviously, the Congress is important. But these critical moments, look at these are all court cases. U.S. is founded by people fleeing religious persecution. Now, when those colonizers came to America, they set up their religious colonies, the religious communities in America, and they often were persecutorial towards people who didn't belong to their religion. And that would cause some of these groups to go off and form their own colonies. So like Maryland, I don't know if any of you have been to Maryland, Baltimore is the capital of Maryland. was named after Queen Mary, the last Catholic monarch of the United Kingdom, of Great Britain, and founded by Catholic dissidents who left Britain, and the British didn't like them anyway, so let's do something with them. Let's send them to North America and have them colonize our colonies there. So Maryland was founded by Catholic dissidents from the United Kingdom. Rhode Island, lots of these different religious groups and sects emerge. And so the U.S. Constitution explicitly did not support a national church or religion. And this is a source of controversy today because evangelical conservative populists, they claim that, oh, sure, okay, we don't want to impose any religious sectarian belief, but America is a very religious society, they claim. And religion was critically important in making America the country that it is today, a beacon of freedom and prosperity. So even if we don't have one single national church, the way the British have the Church of England, we should support and applaud and encourage religious activity and belief. And we should not restrict it by unfair government policies. And often some of these people will focus upon, particularly they say, Judeo-Christian values. And what to do with Muslims and Muslim values, well, that's a source of controversy, supposedly. Okay, so how much time we have left here? So let's do a little exercise. Make this a little more participatory. So here is a civil rights exercise. And let's see if I can do this without shutting down the computer. And like this, and now I have to figure out how to adjust the view, and then does anybody remember how to move the I used to know, I can't remember how to shift the view. Oh, yes, thank you, thank you. Oh, that's the one for next week. Let's do civil liberties. Yeah, Bill of Rights, this is the Bill of Rights one. Thank you. So go to view, go to first one. Okay, so these exercises were prepared at a website to improve education on government in the United States, and oriented towards, particularly towards advanced high school students in the United States. But since you're not Americans, you probably know a little bit less than your typical American college student about the United States. So Bill of Rights, I have rights. The year is 2056. The world as you know it has been completely destroyed by alien invaders. You and a group of survivors have just won a terrifying battle against the aliens who have now, I gotta make sure you can see this. I have to share screen. You've won a terrifying battle against the aliens who have now left the planet. Now you're free. In other words, you defeated the British after a cataclysmic war. I think 1% of the US population in North America died in the American Revolutionary War. So 1 out of 100 people died in that war against the British. So it was pretty violent. Now you're free, but everyone is still afraid because there is nothing on paper to guarantee people will have rights. The leaders of the group have decided to create the pamphlet of protections. The pamphlet will define what rights people have. The following are rights that some of the leaders think should be included in the pamphlet of protections. They want your input. Mark your top 10 choices below. So we have 15 choices. So I would like you each to choose 10 from this 15 that you think should be in a statement of what your fundamental rights are. Not all 15, just 10. So some are more important to you than others. They're so important they should be, maybe they're all important, but there's 10 that should be written down so that we all agree that these are the rights that we have because we've written them down and we've adopted the pamphlet of protections. So let me send this to you. This, go like here, chatting. This one, I think, here, right? No, oh, no. Go to chatting, that's right, chatting. Here, go here, go to, where's the, where are my files? Here. There it is. Here. Okay, so you all have that file now. And let's break up into groups and close that. No, I'll do that. And so I think we have, let's go to 3 groups and assign you randomly. And so please join your groups, please. Please join these 3 groups, Juliet, Micah, and Yi Ju Young in room 1, Anais and Chung Dujin in room 2, and Kim Pyong Koo and Ju Ojin, in room 3. Please join these groups and see if you can talk amongst yourselves as to which of these 10 rights you would like to have in the included in the pamphlet of protection. So I go back to share screen and open that up, and there you can see these are the 15. So choose 10, and the heads, the first person in the group will speak, and it is heads, and the first person in the group. Oh. Thank you.
Maybe it might be easier for people that are in the class, since we're all free, to maybe have a group of the people in the class instead of having some people in the Zoom, some people in the class.
Don't you think it's fun, though, to communicate with people while they're outside of the classroom and try to communicate?
I think you can, but I think maybe it's easier for them to communicate between themselves.
Uh-huh.
For instance, I'm not on the Zoom right now.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. All right. So that's
It's just an idea.
okay. So let me go back to the breakout rooms.
Because I know that it has to be some students that were in the class who don't speak.
Uh-huh.